If you have ever wondered what really lies beneath the sands of Giza, tell me where you're listening from tonight and leave a thought in the comments. If this channel helps you rest, subscribing is always appreciated. Now, close your eyes, because somewhere beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx, there is a chamber that no living person has ever entered. Press your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Hold it there. Feel the warmth of your own palate. The smooth curve of bone just behind your front teeth. That bone is limestone. Not literally, but almost. The calcium phosphate in your skull is a cousin of the calcium carbonate that makes up the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. You are, in a very real chemical sense, made of the same substance as the Sphinx. Now release your tongue, let your jaw go slack, and listen, because tonight we are going underground. Here is something strange. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most photographed monuments on Earth. Tourists stand in front of it every single day, squinting against the desert sun, holding up phones, tilting their heads. They see a lion's body, a pharaoh's face, weathered stone, sand, but almost none of them know what is underneath it. In 1991, a geologist named Robert Schoch stood at the base of the Sphinx enclosure and noticed something that Egyptologists have been walking past for a century. The walls of the trench surrounding the Sphinx were not eroded by wind and sand. They were eroded by water. Deep, vertical, rounded channels carved into the limestone. The kind of erosion you see on cliff sides in rainy climates. Not in deserts. Not in places where it has barely rained for 5,000 years. The wind blows through the enclosure, even now. Dry, papery, carrying the faintest smell of dust and diesel from Cairo to the east. Schoch's observation opened a door that has never been properly closed. If the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by water, by prolonged, heavy rainfall, then the Sphinx could not have been carved in 2500 BCE when the dynastic Egyptians say it was built. It would have to be much, much older. Thousands of years older. Perhaps carved in a time before the Sahara was a desert at all, when the plateau was green, when rain fell in sheets, and rivers ran where sand dunes now stand. That single geological observation, water erosion on a monument in the desert, implies that human civilization may be far older than we think, and that the Sphinx may be guarding something beneath its belly that we have not yet been allowed to see. A dry wind stirs against your skin. Somewhere, sand shifts. Tonight, you do not need to stay awake for any of this. If sleep finds you somewhere in the middle of an ancient corridor or beneath the belly of a stone lion, that is perfectly fine. You will still be here. The story will still be here. And if you wake in the morning remembering only the feeling of cool stone under your fingertips and the smell of old air, then the story did its job. You are welcome here, whether you make it to the end or not. Let us begin where all things begin in Egypt, with a river. 12,000 years ago, the Nile Valley looked nothing like it does today. The river was wider, sometimes miles wider during the annual flood, and the land on either side was not desert. It was savanna, tall grasses, acacia trees, pools of standing water reflecting a sky thick with birds. The air smelled of wet earth and green growth. Hippos grunted in the shallows. Crocodiles slid between papyrus reeds taller than a man. And on the western bank, rising above the floodplain like the spine of some great buried animal, sat the Giza Plateau. The plateau is a shelf of nummulitic limestone, ancient seabed compressed over 50 million years into solid rock. If you broke off a piece and held it to your ear, you would hear nothing. But if you held it to the light, you would see tiny spiral shapes embedded in the stone. Foraminifera, the shells of creatures that lived and died in a warm, shallow sea long before anything with a backbone existed. That same limestone is in the walls of your house if you live in certain parts of the Mediterranean. It is in the cement beneath highways. It is in the calcium tablets some of you take each morning with your coffee. The deep past is never far away. It is in your bones. It is in your kitchen. A bird calls across the floodplain. The sound carries for miles in the wet air. Sometime around 10,000 BCE. Give or take 1,000 years, because dates this old are always approximate. The climate of North Africa was in the middle of a profound shift. The last ice age was ending. Glaciers over Europe were melting. Ocean currents were rearranging themselves. And the African monsoon belt was pushing northward, bringing seasonal rains deep into what is now the Sahara. This period is called the African Humid Period, or sometimes the Green Sahara, and it lasted for thousands of years. From roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a patchwork of lakes, rivers, wetlands, and grasslands. Cave paintings in what is now Algeria show people swimming, fishing, herding cattle across green plains. Rock art in Libya depicts giraffes and elephants roaming land that is now nothing but sand and stone. The rain fell on the Giza Plateau too. Not occasionally, not in rare storms, regularly, seasonally, for millennia. Water pooled in the natural depressions of the limestone. It ran in channels down the eastern slope toward Nile. It soaked into cracks and fissures, dissolving the softer layers of rock, hollowing out cavities beneath the surface. The plateau was alive with water. You could hear it, the dripping in the dark spaces underground, the gurgle of runoff after a storm, the soft hiss of moisture evaporating from warm stone at dawn. If you placed your palm flat against the rock, you would feel it, cool and slightly damp, the stone breathing. Now, here's the question that keeps certain geologists and archaeologists awake at night. If water shaped the Giza Plateau for 6,000 years during the African Humid Period, carving channels, dissolving chambers, reshaping the surface, then what did it do to the bedrock where the Sphinx now sits? What cavities did it create? What passages did it hollow out beneath the surface? And did someone, at some point, find those natural cavities and use them? The silence beneath the stone is very old. Older than the pyramids. Older than the dynasties. Older, perhaps, than any name we know. In 1993, a team led by a seismologist named Thomas DeBecke conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys around the Sphinx. The technology works by sending electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measuring how they bounce back. Different materials, solid rock, sand, air, water, reflect the signal differently. It is the same principle as sonar, but through stone instead of water. DeBecke's results showed something unexpected. Beneath the left paw of the Sphinx, the radar detected a large rectangular anomaly. A void, an empty space in the bedrock, roughly 9 meters by 12 meters, at a depth of about 5 meters. The shape was too regular to be natural. Natural cavities in limestone tend to be rounded, following the paths of water dissolution. This was angular. geometric. It had corners. A chamber. The Egyptian authorities did not grant permission to excavate. They have not granted permission since. The chamber, if it is a chamber, remains sealed, untouched, silent. Rain falls somewhere in the distance of your memory. The sound of it on warm stone. Debicki was not the first to detect anomalies beneath the Sphinx. In 1977, a team from Stanford Research Institute used resistivity measurements, passing electrical current through the ground and measuring how it flows, and found several cavities beneath and around the Sphinx. One appeared to be a tunnel running from the rear of the Sphinx toward the second pyramid of Khafre. Another seemed to be a vertical shaft descending from the rump of the Sphinx into bedrock. Earlier still, in 1978, the American Research Center in Egypt drilled several boreholes around the Sphinx. At least one borehole behind the Sphinx encountered a void. The drill dropped into empty space before hitting rock again. The logs from that drilling program have been partially published, partially lost, and partially disputed. What is not disputed is that the Sphinx sits on bedrock that is riddled with natural fissures, dissolved layers, and at least some anomalous voids that do not match the expected geology. Whether those voids are natural cavities enlarged by water, or whether there's something else entirely, remains an open question. Your breath moves slowly now, in and out, the same rhythm as the Nile rising and falling. The same rhythm as rain falling on limestone 10,000 years ago. There is one more detail worth mentioning before we go deeper. The Sphinx itself is not a single piece of stone. Its body was carved from the living bedrock of the plateau, quarried in place by removing the rock around it, leaving the lion shape standing. But its head is made from a harder layer of limestone than its body. The body is softer nummulitic limestone, more vulnerable to erosion. The head sits on a layer called member 3, denser, more resistant. This geological fact explains something that has puzzled observers for centuries. The head of the Sphinx is in much better condition than its body. If the entire monument were the same age and subjected to the same weathering, the head should be as eroded as the body, but is not. The head is relatively crisp. The body is deeply weathered. One explanation is geological. Harder stone weathers more slowly. That is true. But Schock and others have pointed out that the difference is too extreme for geology alone. The body shows thousands of years of water erosion. The head does not. One possibility, controversial, debated, but not dismissed, is that the head was recarved. That the original head was larger, more weathered, and was reshaped by a later dynasty into the pharaonic face we see today. If that is true, then the Sphinx's body is far older than its face. The lion has been lying on the plateau since a time before the Pharaohs, and whatever is beneath it has been waiting even longer. Consider, for a moment, what it means for a civilization to carve a monument and then vanish so completely that the next civilization assumes they built it themselves. The dynastic Egyptians, the ones we know, the ones with the hieroglyphs and the gold masks, attributed the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled around 2500 BC. His face, they said, his monument. But there are no inscriptions on the Sphinx itself that name Khafre. There is a stela, a stone tablet, placed between the paws by a later pharaoh, Thutmose IV, around 1400 BC. It tells a story about the Sphinx being buried in sand up to its shoulders, and Thutmose being promised the throne if he cleared it. Think about that. By 1400 BCE, the Sphinx was already ancient enough to be buried, already mysterious enough that a pharaoh felt he needed to bargain with it, already old enough that its origins were legend, not history. The sand settles. The wind carries the smell of warm stone and something older, the mineral tang of deep limestone, the scent of geological time. There is a passage at the rear of the Sphinx. It is small, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. It descends at a steep angle into the bedrock and then stops, blocked. Whether it was intentionally sealed or collapsed naturally is unclear. Several researchers have entered the first few meters of this passage over the decades. They describe the air inside as still and cool, carrying a faint dampness that seems impossible in the desert. The walls are rough cut. Tool marks are visible, though their age is debated. Another passage exists on the north side of the Sphinx, about midway along the body. It too descends into the rock. It too ends abruptly. A third opening was documented on the top of the Sphinx's back in the early 20th century, a narrow vertical shaft that drops into the body of the monument and appears to connect to a cavity inside the chest of the lion. 3 passages, at least one subsurface chamber detected by radar, multiple voids confirmed by resistivity surveys, and a bureaucratic silence that has lasted decades. Your heartbeat is slower now than it was when you first pressed play. That is the body doing what it was designed to do, settling into safety, releasing the tension of the day. Your ancestors knew this rhythm, the cooling of the body as night deepened, the slowing of breath as the fire burned low, the gradual surrender to the dark. The Sphinx knows this rhythm too. Every night for thousands of years, the stone has cooled, contracted slightly. The hairline fractures in its body have opened and closed with the temperature, breathing in a way. The monument exhales in the heat of the day and inhales in the cold of the night. It has been doing this for so long that the cycles are written in its surface, microfractures that geologists can read like tree rings. What lies beneath it has been breathing too. Air moves through limestone, slowly, through cracks and pores and dissolved channels. Air circulates in the deep rock the way blood moves through capillaries. The chambers beneath the Sphinx, whatever they are, wherever they lead, are not dead spaces. They are part of a living geological system, exchanging moisture and air with the surface above. If you were to press your ear against the bedrock of the Giza Plateau on a still night, you might hear it. A faint resonance. Not sound exactly, but the suggestion of sound. The way you can sense the emptiness of a large room, even in total darkness. The rock knows its own hollows. And here, tonight, we're going to follow the water. We're going to trace the rain that fell 10,000 years ago as it seeped through the limestone, dissolved the soft layers, carved the channels and chambers that now lie sealed beneath the most famous monument on Earth. We're going to ask what the water found down there, and what it left behind. But that is for the next hour. For now, just breathe. Let the warmth of the blanket around you become the warmth of desert stone at dusk. Let the quiet of your room become the quiet of a plateau overlooking a green river valley, 10,000 years before anyone thought to build a pyramid. The stone is patient. It has nowhere to be. Neither do you. The first clue is always the stone itself. If you have ever run your fingers along the wall of an old building, a church, a castle, a cellar dug into chalk, you know that stone tells you things. It tells you about temperature, about moisture, about the centuries that have pressed against it like sleeping bodies in a narrow bed. Limestone, especially, is a gossip. It records everything. The limestone of the Giza Plateau is layered, not uniformly, but in alternating bands of hard and soft rock, laid down over millions of years when this part of Africa sat beneath a shallow tropical sea. The harder layers are dense with the compressed shells of ancient sea creatures, nummulites, foraminifera, tiny spiraled organisms that lived and died and sank and became stone. The softer layers are more porous, more calcium-rich, more vulnerable to dissolution. Water finds the soft layers. It always does. When Robert Schoch first examined the Sphinx enclosure in 1990, he was not looking for controversy. He was a geologist at Boston University, trained in stratigraphy and sedimentology. He had been invited to Egypt by an independent researcher named John Anthony West, who had been arguing for years that the Sphinx showed signs of water erosion rather than wind erosion. West was not a geologist. He needed one. Schoch agreed to look. The smell inside the enclosure that morning was chalk dust and exhaust fumes. Cairo's traffic noise hummed in the background like a low electrical current. The sun was already harsh by 9 o'clock, pressing against the back of Schoch's neck as he knelt beside the western wall of the trench. What he saw changed the trajectory of the debate permanently. Wind erosion in limestone produces a characteristic pattern: horizontal grooves. The wind carries sand particles that abrade the softer layers faster than the harder ones, creating a layered, shelf-like appearance. Hard ridges alternating with recessed bands. You see this all over the Giza Plateau. You see it on the core blocks of the pyramids. You see it on the tombs of the Mokattam Hills to the east. It is the signature of desert weathering, as recognizable to a geologist as a fingerprint. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure did not show this pattern. Instead, Schoch saw deep vertical channels, rounded, sinuous, cutting across the horizontal bedding planes without regard for hard or soft layers. The profiles were undulating, wavy, smooth. This is what water does. Rainfall runoff cascading down a rock face carves vertical channels. It does not discriminate between hard and soft layers the way wind does. It cuts straight down, following gravity, smoothing everything in its path into rounded contours. The sound of water on stone is a sound your body remembers, even if your mind does not. Rain on a rock wall, a stream over pebbles, the slow drip in a cave. Your kidneys filter water through stone-like structures right now. Glomeruli, tiny limestone castles inside your own body. You carry the memory of water and rock in your anatomy. Schoch documented the erosion profiles systematically. He compared the Sphinx enclosure walls to other structures on the plateau, the nearby tombs of the 4th dynasty, the quarry walls left from pyramid construction, the causeways connecting the pyramids to their valley temples. Every other structure showed classic wind erosion. Only the Sphinx enclosure showed the vertical, rounded, water-carved channels. He also noticed something else. The depth of erosion was uneven. The western end of the enclosure, the oldest part, surrounding the rump of the Sphinx, was more deeply eroded than the eastern end around the chest and paws. If the entire enclosure had been carved at the same time and exposed to the same weather, the erosion should be roughly uniform. The fact that it was deeper in the west suggested that the western portion had been exposed for a longer period. Either the Sphinx was carved in stages, or the eastern portion had been buried and protected for part of its history. Dust settles on every surface, even on the page of a story, even on the back of your hand. The geological evidence did not stop at the enclosure walls. Schock also examined the body of the Sphinx itself. The lion's flanks showed the same rounded, vertical erosion patterns. The haunches were deeply weathered, far more than you would expect from a monument carved in 2500 BCE, even accounting for the softness of the lower limestone layers. The degree of weathering suggested exposure to rainfall over a period of at least several thousand years. But the last significant rainfall on the Giza Plateau occurred at the end of the African humid period, around 5000 to 4000 BCE. Dynastic Egypt, the Egypt of the Pharaohs, the pyramids, the hieroglyphs, did not begin until roughly 3100 BC. If water erosion shaped the Sphinx, then the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by millennia. Schock initially proposed a conservative date of around 5000 to 7000 BCE. Later, as he refined his analysis, he pushed that estimate back further, to perhaps 9000 BCE or earlier, deep into the Neolithic, when the Sahara was still green and hunter-gatherers were only beginning to experiment with the earliest forms of agriculture. A bird settles on a ledge. Its claws click against the stone. Then silence. There is another layer of evidence that tends to be overlooked in the popular accounts of this debate. The subsurface hydrology of the Giza Plateau has been studied by Egyptian geologists since the 1980s. Groundwater sits beneath the plateau at varying depths, shallower near the Nile, deeper as you move west. In the area directly beneath the Sphinx, the water table has fluctuated dramatically over the millennia. During the African humid period, it would have been much higher. Water would have saturated the lower limestone layers, accelerating dissolution from below while rain attacked from above. The Sphinx sits in a depression, a natural low point on the plateau. This is not accidental. Whoever chose to carve the Sphinx here chose the place where water had already done the most work. The bedrock was already sculpted. The enclosure was already partially formed by natural erosion. The ancient carvers did not start from a flat surface. They started from a shape that the water had been preparing for them, slowly, patiently, for thousands of years. Geologist Colin Reeder, working independently of Schock, reached similar conclusions in the early 2000s. Reeder examined the drainage patterns on the plateau surface and demonstrated that rainwater runoff from the higher ground to the west would have flowed directly through the area where the Sphinx sits. The enclosure acted as a natural catchment, a bowl that collected and held water during every rainstorm. This water would have pooled around the base of whatever formation existed there, soaking into the rock, dissolving it from every side. Reeder proposed that the Sphinx enclosure was initially quarried not to create the Sphinx, but to extract building stone. Only later, perhaps centuries later, did someone look at the remaining rock formation and see a shape worth carving. A body, a guardian, a lion watching the sunrise. The scent of wet limestone, mineral and clean, like the first breath after rain. Reeder's work added another dimension to the erosion debate. He noted that the drainage channels visible on the plateau's surface, natural grooves where rainwater once flowed, converge on the Sphinx enclosure from the northwest. These channels are ancient. They have been dry for thousands of years, filled with wind-blown sand and debris. But their paths are still visible in satellite imagery and in aerial photographs taken by the Royal Air Force in the 1930s, before modern development obscured the terrain. The channels tell a story of sustained water flow. Not flash floods, not occasional storms, but regular seasonal runoff over centuries. The volume of water required to carve these channels is inconsistent with the sparse rainfall that occurred after 3000 BCE. The channels belong to a wetter time, and they lead directly to the Sphinx. You can almost hear it. The sound of water finding its lowest point, gathering, pooling, pressing against the stone. The patience of water is absolute. It will wait for 10,000 years, and the stone will yield eventually. It always does. To understand what the water erosion means, think of the Giza Plateau as a body, not a metaphor, a literal body. Imagine the plateau as a torso lying face down on the earth. The pyramids sit on the shoulder blades, the highest, most prominent points. The Sphinx sits lower, near the rib cage, in a natural depression where the terrain slopes eastward toward the Nile floodplain. The limestone layers are like muscle and fascia, some dense and resistant, some soft and yielding. Now imagine rain falling on this body, not a drizzle. Seasonal monsoon rains, heavy and warm, the kind that turn packed earth into mud within minutes. The water strikes the high points first, the shoulders, the spine, and runs downhill. It pools in the depressions. It finds the natural creases and folds in the rock and follows them downward, always downward, pulled by gravity toward the river below. Over decades, the water carves shallow channels in the surface. Over centuries, those channels deepen. Over millennia, the water penetrates into the body of the rock itself. It seeps through pores and cracks. It dissolves the softer calcium layers from within. It creates voids, small at first, then larger. Cavities form in the bones of the plateau. Underground streams develop, flowing through dissolved channels in the limestone the way blood flows through arteries. This process is called karstification. It is the same process that creates caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers in limestone regions all over the world. The Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico is karst. The Ban in Ireland is karst. Much of Florida sits on karst limestone, which is why sinkholes open suddenly beneath parking lots and swimming pools. The ground looks solid until one day it is not. Your breath moves through you the way water moves through stone, finding the soft spaces, opening them, passing through. The Giza Plateau is a karst landscape. This is not speculation. Geologists have documented the karst features for decades. There are sinkholes on the plateau. There are natural cavities in the bedrock. There are dissolution channels that follow the softer limestone layers horizontally for tens of meters before disappearing into the dark. Egyptian geologist Farouk Elbaz has mapped many of these features using satellite imagery and ground surveys. The plateau is not solid. It is perforated, hollowed, threaded with voids. Now imagine you are a person living on this plateau during the Green Sahara period, 9 or 10,000 years ago. The rain has been falling for generations. Your grandparents knew rain. Your great-grandparents knew rain. The concept of a desert does not exist in your vocabulary because you have never seen one. The plateau is your home. You know its surfaces, its slopes, its depressions where water collects. And you know the openings. There are places where the rock opens up, cracks wide enough to crawl into, depressions where the ground has collapsed into a cavity below, holes in the bedrock that breathe, cool air rising from them in the summer heat, warm air sinking into them during cold nights. You have explored some of these openings. They lead to chambers, natural chambers, dissolved out of the limestone by millennia of water. Some are small, barely large enough to sit in. Others are vast, cathedral-like spaces where your voice echoes off walls you cannot see. You use these chambers, not every day, not casually. You use them the way every early human society has used caves, as sacred spaces, as places of ritual, burial, storage, shelter from storms. The chambers beneath the plateau are cool when the surface bakes. They are dry when the rain pours. They are dark and quiet and separate from the world above. And eventually, at some point that we cannot precisely date, you begin to modify them. You widen an entrance. You smooth the floor. You carve niches into the walls for offerings or storage. You connect two natural chambers with a short tunnel. You deepen a natural shaft to access a lower level. The modifications are modest at first, practical, not monumental, but over centuries, they accumulate. The natural cavities become something else, something intentional, something built. This is Schock's theory, and it is also the theory of several other researchers who have examined the plateau's geology. The chambers beneath the Sphinx are not entirely artificial. They are natural karst cavities formed by water dissolution during the African humid period that were later discovered, modified, and used by an ancient culture that predated dynastic Egypt. The coolness of the underground seeps into your skin like a slow thought. There is precedent for this kind of discovery. Across the Mediterranean, in Malta, the Hal-Saflieni hypogeum is a subterranean complex carved in a limestone that dates to around 4000 BCE. It began as natural caves that were enlarged, smoothed, and decorated by a Neolithic culture that left no written records. The hypogeum has multiple levels, carved pillars, painted ceilings, and acoustic properties that suggest it was used for ritual purposes. When it was rediscovered in 1902, accidentally, by workers building a house above it, it contained the remains of roughly 7,000 individuals. No one had known it was there. An entire underground temple, used for at least 1,000 years, buried and forgotten. In Cappadocia, in modern Turkey, entire cities were carved underground. Derinkuyu, Kaymakli, reaching 18 stories beneath the surface. They held thousands of people with ventilation shafts, water wells, grain storage, churches, and stables. These underground cities date from various periods, but the deepest levels may extend back to the Hittites or earlier. The surface above them shows almost no indication of what lies below. A farmer plowing a field, a child chasing a dog across dry grass, and 18 stories beneath their feet, an empty city, silent for centuries. The earth conceals. This is what it does. And humans, for as long as they have been human, have understood that the space beneath the surface is different from the space above. Cooler, darker, sacred, the womb of the world. The parallel is not exact. Malta is not Egypt. But the principle is the same. Neolithic cultures regularly modified natural limestone cavities for sacred and practical purposes. They did so without metal tools, without written plans, without any of the technology we associate with civilization. They did it with patience, with stone tools, and with an intimate knowledge of the rock they lived on. If this theory is correct, it reframes everything we think we know about the Sphinx. The monument was not carved into random bedrock. It was carved above chambers that already existed. The lion was placed deliberately, intentionally, over a network of natural and modified underground spaces. The Sphinx is not just a sculpture. It is a guardian, a marker, a door. And the passages that have been documented, the shaft at the rear, the opening on the north flank, the vertical shaft on the back, are not later additions or natural cracks. They are access points, entrances to whatever lies below. But the story is not that simple. It never is. Schoch's water erosion hypothesis has been challenged, debated, and rejected by many mainstream Egyptologists. The most prominent critic has been Mark Lehner, one of the world's leading authorities on the Giza Plateau. Lehner has spent decades mapping the site, stone by stone, layer by layer, and he argues that the erosion on the Sphinx enclosure can be explained without invoking ancient rainfall. Lehner's counterargument rests on several points. First, he notes that the Sphinx enclosure was carved into bedrock that was already weathered. The ancient quarry workers removed stone from around the Sphinx, exposing subsurface layers that had been subject to chemical weathering while buried. This kind of subsurface weathering, called subaerial exfoliation, can produce rounded, undulating profiles similar to those caused by rainfall runoff. The shapes look alike, even though the processes that created them are different. Second, Lehner points out that the Sphinx has been buried in sand for most of its history. Ancient records document at least 6 major clearing operations, from Thutmose for around 1400 BCE to modern excavations in the 1920s and 1930s. When the Sphinx is buried, sand holds moisture against the stone. This trapped moisture accelerates chemical weathering of the softer limestone layers, producing deep erosion that could be mistaken for rainfall damage. Third, Lehner argues that the quarrying sequence explains the uneven erosion. The western end of the enclosure was carved first. It had to be to shape the rump of the Sphinx, and was therefore exposed to the elements for longer than the eastern end. The difference in erosion depth does not require the Sphinx to be ancient. It only requires the construction to have taken several decades, with the western portion exposed while the eastern portion was still being carved. Salt crystallizes in the pores of the rock. You can hear it if you listen closely enough. A faint crackling, like ice forming on a pond at night. There are other complications. The Egyptian authorities have been resistant to independent geological surveys of the Sphinx and the surrounding plateau. Permits for ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and core drilling have been granted sparingly, and sometimes revoked mid-study. The reasons given are usually concerns about damage to the monument, but critics argue that the restrictions are also political, that the Egyptian government is protective of the established chronology and uncomfortable with research that might challenge it. The 1991 Debeki survey, the one that detected the rectangular anomaly beneath the left paw, has never been replicated. Not because the technology does not exist, Ground-penetrating radar has improved enormously since 1991. A modern survey could produce far more detailed images of the subsurface. But permission has not been granted. In 1996, a team associated with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, a group with its own controversial beliefs about ancient civilizations, attempted to conduct sonar surveys inside the known passages of the Sphinx. They were expelled from the site by Egyptian authorities. The expulsion was messy, public, and left a bitter aftertaste that has made subsequent applications for research permits more difficult. The result is a frustrating information vacuum. The most basic questions about what lies beneath the Sphinx remain unanswered, not because they are unanswerable, but because the investigations that could answer them have not been permitted. Your body holds its own sealed chambers. Your bones are not solid. They are filled with marrow, with spongy tissue, with spaces where blood is made. You are, at this very moment, a structure with internal voids. Just like the Plateau, there's also the question of what we might find, and what finding it would mean. If the chambers beneath the Sphinx are natural cavities, karst voids shaped by water and nothing more, then they are geologically interesting but historically insignificant. Many limestone plateaus around the world have similar features. The Giza Plateau would simply be another karst landscape, unremarkable except for the monuments built on top of it. But if the chambers show signs of human modification, carved walls, smooth floors, structural reinforcements, artifacts, then the implications are enormous. If those modifications predate dynastic Egypt, they would represent evidence of an organized, technically capable civilization existing in the Nile Valley thousands of years before the historical record currently acknowledges. This is the territory where science meets politics, where geology meets nationalism, where curiosity meets the fear of what might be found. A cool draft moves through the space between waking and sleeping. You feel it on the back of your neck. Think about what it would mean for your understanding of human history if those chambers contain artifacts. Not gold, not treasure. That is a movie fantasy, and it distracts from what would actually matter. What would matter is something far more modest and far more revolutionary. A pottery shard with unfamiliar markings. A stone tool of unexpected sophistication. A piece of carved bone with symbols that predate hieroglyphs by 3,000 years. Even the absence of artifacts would be significant. A clean, smooth, empty chamber beneath the Sphinx would still tell us that someone carved it, someone sealed it, and someone intended it to remain undisturbed. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but the refusal to look is something else entirely. The debate is further complicated by the seismographic data from the mid-1990s. In 1993 and again in 1996, researchers used seismographic equipment to measure the propagation of sound wave through the bedrock beneath the Sphinx. Sound moves differently through solid rock than through air-filled voids. By analyzing how seismic waves bent, reflected, and attenuated as they passed through the plateau, researchers could infer the presence of underground cavities. The results were ambiguous. Some readings were consistent with natural geological layering, harder and softer bands of limestone producing reflections that could be mistaken for void spaces. Other readings showed sharp discontinuities that were more difficult to explain geologically. At least two research teams independently concluded that there were anomalous voids beneath the Sphinx that warranted further investigation. Further investigation has not occurred. The data remains published but unresolved. The chambers, if they exist, remain sealed. And here's where the story takes its most uncomfortable turn. The question is no longer purely scientific. It is also human. It involves ego, institutional power, national identity, and the deep discomfort that comes when established narratives are threatened by new evidence. Egyptologists have built careers on the conventional chronology. The Egyptian government derives enormous cultural prestige and tourism revenue from its pharaonic heritage. A discovery that pushed the origins of Egyptian civilization back by 5,000 or 6,000 years would not just rewrite textbooks. It would redistribute credit. It would raise questions about who the original builders were, where they came from, and what happened to them. These are not easy questions, and the fact that they remain unasked is not quite a conspiracy. It is something more mundane and more human. It is institutional inertia. It is the gravitational pull of established knowledge. It is the way large organizations, universities, governments, professional societies, naturally resist ideas that require them to reorganize themselves. The night deepens. Somewhere beneath you, the earth holds its own secrets. Layers of rock, layers of time, layers of silence. You do not need to solve anything tonight. The mystery will be here in the morning. But there is one more piece of evidence that we should consider before we move on. And it involves something that no one expected to find. In 2017, researchers from the Scan Pyramids project, using muon tomography, a technique that tracks cosmic ray particles as they pass through solid structures, announced the discovery of a large void inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The void was at least 30 meters long, located above the Grand Gallery. It had been sealed since construction. No one had entered it in 4,500 years. Muon tomography works because cosmic rays from deep space constantly bombard the Earth. When these rays strike the upper atmosphere, they produce particles called muons, which rain down through everything: air, rock, water, flesh. Muons pass through solid material more slowly than through empty space. By placing muon detectors around a structure and measuring the arrival patterns, you can map the density of the material between the detectors and the sky. Dense material slows muons down. Voids let them through faster. The technique has been used on volcanoes, on archaeological sites in Mesoamerica, and on nuclear reactors. It is non-invasive. It requires no drilling, no digging, no physical contact with the structure. It simply listens to the rain of particles from space. It could be used on the Sphinx. If muon detectors were placed inside the known passages of the Sphinx and left for several months, they would produce a density map of the bedrock beneath the monument. Every void, every cavity, every passage would appear as a region of reduced density, a shadow in the cosmic rain. The technology exists. The technique is proven. The question is whether it will be permitted. The muons are falling through you right now, through the roof of wherever you are, through your skull, your chest, your hands. They have been falling since long before you were born and will continue long after. They pass through the Sphinx every second of every day, mapping its secrets to no one. Perhaps one day someone will listen. There's a particular kind of frustration that comes from standing at the edge of an answer. You can feel the shape of it. You can almost smell it. The way you can smell rain before it arrives, a shift in pressure, a dampness in the air that has not yet become water. The evidence beneath the Sphinx is like that. It is present but unreached, detected but unconfirmed, measured but not opened. In 1998, the director of the Giza Plateau, Paws, supervised a limited exploration of the shaft at the rear of the Sphinx. A small camera was lowered into the passage. The footage, which has been partially released, showed rough-hewn walls and a descending corridor that turned sharply before the camera could go no further. Paws described the passage as a natural fissure, unmodified. Others who have examined the footage disagree, noting what appear to be chisel marks on the walls. The footage has not been independently analyzed. The passage has not been entered since. And so we are left where we began, with questions, with stone, with a faint sound of water that fell 10,000 years ago, still echoing in the rock if you know how to listen. The evidence points downward, always downward, into the dark, into the earth, into the spaces where the rain went and never came back. Somewhere in the bedrock, a hairline crack opens a fraction of a millimeter as the night air cools the surface. It has been opening and closing like this for 10,000 years. Each cycle, each breath of stone, widens it by an amount too small to measure with the naked eye. But over millennia, those fractions accumulate. The crack becomes a fissure. The fissure becomes a channel. The channel becomes a passage. And the passage leads somewhere. It always leads somewhere. Close your eyes if they are not closed already. Feel the weight of the blanket on your body. Feel the weight of the air on the blanket. Feel the weight of the sky on the air. And beneath all of it, beneath you, beneath the floor, beneath the foundations of wherever you are lying, stone, layers and layers of it. And in those layers, spaces, voids, rooms that no one has entered, stories that no one has read. For now, the stone holds what it holds, and we will follow the water deeper. Picture this. It is somewhere around 8,000 BC. The exact year does not matter. What matters is the sound. A low, rhythmic grinding, stone against stone, coming from somewhere nearby. It is the sound of grain being crushed between a saddle quern and a handstone. Back and forth, back and forth. The same motion that your wrist makes when you roll dough on a counter, except harder, slower, and against rough granite that has been worn smooth in the center from years of use. You are lying on a reed mat. The fibers press into your cheek, rough, warm, smelling faintly of the river mud where the reeds grew. Beneath the mat, the ground is packed earth, cool against your body even though the air outside is already beginning to warm. You have not opened your eyes yet. You do not need to. You know this place by its sounds. The grinding stops. A woman coughs softly. A child murmurs something in a language that has no written form, no alphabet, no surviving record. The words dissolve into the air like morning mist. Whatever she said, it is gone now, lost to a silence 10,000 years deep. The smell reaches you next. Smoke. Not with smoke. There are few trees on the plateau. This is dung smoke, acrid and earthy, rising from a small fire pit near the entrance of the shelter. Someone is heating flat cakes of emmer wheat on a stone slab propped over the coals. The smell of toasting grain is one of the oldest smells in human experience. Your nose recognizes it even now, across all those millennia. The smell of bread, the smell of morning. A dog barks somewhere outside. Short, sharp, then silence. Dogs have been with humans for at least 5,000 years by this point. They are not pets in the way you understand the word. They are partners. They guard. They hunt. They sleep in the doorways of shelters and growl at hyenas in the dark. The dog outside this shelter has never been bathed, never worn a collar, never been to a veterinarian. But it knows its people. It knows their smells, their voices, their rhythms. It knows that the grinding sound means food is coming. Now you open your eyes. The light is soft. Dawn on the Giza Plateau in 800 BCE is not the blinding white glare of modern Egypt. The air is moister. There is haze. The eastern sky is layered in bands of amber and pale green. And the Nile, wider than you have ever seen a river, catches the light in long silver streaks between stands of papyrus and acacia. Birds move across the water in loose formations. Ibis, heron, pelicans with wingspans wider than a man is tall. The plateau rises behind you to the west. It is bare limestone in places, but not barren. Tufts of coarse grass grow in the cracks. Low scrubby bushes cling to the edges of natural depressions where rainwater collects. The rock itself is pale, almost white in the early light, and streaked with darker bands where iron-rich layers have oxidized. It looks, from a distance, like the ribcage of something enormous half-buried in the earth. There are no pyramids. There will not be pyramids for another 5,000 years. The plateau is just rock, just stone and grass, and the sound of wind moving across an open surface with nothing to stop it. But there is something else. Near the eastern edge of the plateau, where the ground slopes down toward the floodplain, the rock has been shaped. Not dramatically, not monumentally, but deliberately. A natural outcrop has been trimmed. Loose blocks have been removed. A rough path leads from the surface down into a cleft in the bedrock. A natural fissure widened by human hands, its entrance partially sheltered by a low wall of stacked stones. This is the entrance. This is where the water went. And this is where the people go. The cool air rises from the opening like breath from a sleeping mouth. Not everyone uses this entrance. It is not a public doorway in the way you might imagine. Only certain people descend. The woman with the worn teeth. An older man with a scar across his forearm, healed white against his dark skin, who walks with a pronounced limp from a hunting injury that never set properly. A younger woman, perhaps 20, who carries a bundle wrapped in dried animal hide against her chest. These are the ones who know the passages. They have memorized the turns, the places where the ceiling drops, the spots where the floor is slick with condensation. They could navigate the underground in total darkness. And sometimes they do. The rest of the community stays above. Children play on the rocks, their bare feet slapping against warm limestone. Two men sit near the fire, knapping flint, striking precise blows with hammerstone and antler punch, sending thin flakes spinning into the dust. The sound is sharp and musical. Tink, 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 a rhythm older than language. Each flake is examined, turned in the light, tested against a thumbnail. The good ones are set aside. The rest are discarded into a scatter of debitage that will remain on this spot for 10,000 years, waiting for an archaeologist to find it and catalog it and place it in a museum drawer. The flint is not local. The nearest high-quality flint sources are in the Sinai and the Eastern Desert, days of walking. The fact that these people have it means they trade. They have networks. They are not isolated bands scraping by on the edge of survival. They are connected to other groups, other regions, other knowledge systems. The flint in their hands has traveled further than most modern people walk in a year. The woman who is grinding grain stands near the entrance. She is not young. Her hands are thick with calluses, from grinding, from scraping hides, from shaping stone tools, from a lifetime of work that modern humans would find unimaginable. Her teeth are worn nearly flat from years of eating grit-contaminated bread. If you could x-ray her skeleton, you would find arthritis in her knees, her spine, her shoulders. She's perhaps 35. She looks 50. Life expectancy in the Neolithic was not what we would consider generous. But she is alive, and she is complete. Her mind holds knowledge that would fill volumes. The medicinal properties of dozens of plants, the seasonal movements of animal herds, the patterns of weather, the locations of water sources, the genealogies of 3 generations, the stories that explain why the world is the way it is. She carries a civilization in her memory. It has no buildings, no monuments, no written records, but it is a civilization nonetheless. She touches the wall of stacked stones at the entrance. A gesture, habitual, the way you might touch a door frame as you pass through it. Then she descends. Your own hand rests on whatever surface is nearest to you right now. A pillow, a blanket, the arm of a chair. You are touching something. Feel it, the texture against your fingertips. That sense of touch has not changed in 10,000 years. The nerve endings in your skin are the same ones she used to feel the rough stone beneath her palm. Inside, the passage narrows. The ceiling drops. The air changes. It becomes cooler, damper, with a mineral smell that sits at the back of the throat like the taste of well water drawn from deep underground. The smoke from the surface fire does not reach here. The sounds of the morning, the dog, the birds, the grinding, fade behind her as she moves deeper. What replaces them is the sound of the rock itself, a faint dripping, the barely perceptible echo of her own footsteps against the stone floor. The passage is not long, perhaps 20 meters. It opens into a chamber, not vast, but large enough to stand in, large enough for a dozen people to sit in a loose circle with space between them. The ceiling is roughly 2 meters high, arched naturally where the softer limestone has dissolved away, leaving the harder layer above as a roof. The walls are uneven, shaped by water over centuries, but in places they have been smoothed by human hands. You can see the difference. The natural surfaces are pitted and pocked, while the worked surfaces have a faint sheen, a regularity that speaks of intention. Along one wall, niches have been carved into the rock. Small recesses, each about the size of a human head, spaced at irregular intervals. Some contain objects, a polished stone, a bundle of dried reeds wrapped in sinew, a small clay figurine with exaggerated hips and breasts. Others are empty, or contain only dust. The figurine is important, not because of what it represents, fertility, womanhood, the earth, whatever meaning the makers intended, but because of what it tells us about the people who made it. They shaped clay with their hands. They fired it, or dried it in the sun. They placed it in a niche in an underground chamber, in the dark, where no one could see it. This was not decoration. This was not art in the way we use the word. This was communication with something unseen. A prayer, perhaps. An offering. A message sent into the stone. A drop of water falls from the ceiling and strikes the floor. The sound is enormous in the silence. The woman moves to the far end of the chamber, where a flat stone has been placed on the floor like a low table. On it sits several objects. A grinding stone smaller than the one on the surface. A gourd containing a dark red pigment made from ochre mixed with animal fat, and a bundle of what appears to be dried meat wrapped in leaves. She kneels beside the stone and begins to work. What she is doing is preparing for a ceremony, or a burial, or a healing ritual. We do not know the specifics because the people who performed these rituals left no written descriptions. But we know from ethnographic parallels, from studying cultures around the world that use similar underground spaces for similar purposes, that the activities were deeply structured. They had rules, sequences, things that had to be done in the correct order, with the correct materials, at the correct time. The underground chamber was not a casual space. It was a church, a hospital, a courthouse, and a library all at once. She grinds the ochre finer, mixing it with fat until it becomes a smooth paste the color of dry blood. The smell is rich and animal, tallow and iron and earth. She applies a thin line of the pigment to her forearm, then to her forehead. The ochre is not paint. It is identity. It is protection. It is a way of marking the boundary between the surface world and the world below. Humans have been using ochre for over 100,000 years. It is one of the oldest technologies we possess. Older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than the control of fire, some argue. Ochre has been found in Blombo's cave in South Africa, dated to 75,000 BCE, engraved with geometric patterns. It has been found in burial sites across Europe, Africa, and Asia, sprinkled over the dead like a second skin. The red dust of the earth, placed on the body to mark transitions, from life to death, from child to adult, from surface to underground. The ochre on your lips when you eat a meal with iron-rich spices. The flush of blood beneath your skin when you feel embarrassment or desire. Red is the color of the living body. It always has been. Other members of the group begin to arrive. They descend the passage one by one, ducking beneath the low ceiling, blinking as their eyes adjust to the darkness. Each pauses at the entrance to the chamber. Each touches the wall. The same gesture, the same habitual acknowledgement of the threshold. You are entering a different space. The rules here are not the rules of the surface. There are perhaps 8 people now, adults and older children, no infants. Their cries would be too disruptive. The group sits in a rough circle around the flat stone, their knees nearly touching in the confined space. The woman with the ochre begins to speak, or to chant, or to hum, a low, vibrating tone that seems to come from her chest rather than her throat. The sound fills the chamber in a way that is physically palpable. You can feel it in your sternum. The limestone walls amplify it, reflect it, fold it back on itself, until the chamber becomes a resonating body, a stone instrument played by a human voice. Acoustic archaeologists have studied chambers like this. They have found that many Neolithic underground spaces were carved or selected for their resonant properties. The dimensions of the chamber, the shape of the walls, the curvature of the ceiling, All of these affect how sound behaves inside the space. Certain frequencies are amplified, others are dampened. The result is an acoustic environment that can produce altered states of consciousness. The sustained low-frequency drone causes a physiological response in the human brain. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens. The boundary between self and environment begins to soften. You are experiencing something similar right now. The voice in your ear, speaking steadily, at a consistent pace, in a darkened room. Your brain is doing what it was designed to do in the presence of a calm, rhythmic human voice. It is letting go. The stone hums. The air hums. The space between your thoughts widens. Outside, the day unfolds in its ancient pattern. The children have stopped playing and are now helping, sorting seeds, fetching water from a spring that emerges from the base of the plateau, scraping the inner surface of an animal hide with a blunt stone tool. A girl of perhaps 8 carries her infant sibling on her hip, the way children have carried children since before we were fully human. The infant's head lolls against her shoulder. Its eyes are closed. Its breathing is the breathing of someone who trusts the world completely. Food preparation is constant. It is the central activity of daily life, the way it has been for every human society until the Industrial Revolution. While barley is sorted grain by grain, the damaged kernels separated from the whole ones, the chaff blown away with a sharp exhale. Lentils are soaked in a gourd of water. Fish, caught in woven basket traps set in the shallows of the Nile, are gutted and laid on flat stones to dry in the sun. The smell is strong. Fish guts and river mud and the sweet green scent of crushed reeds. There is a technology to all of this that is invisible to modern eyes. The basket traps are woven in a specific pattern that allows small fish to escape while retaining the larger ones. The grain is ground at a specific angle and pressure to produce flour of a consistent texture. The hides are scraped in a specific sequence. Outer membrane first, then inner fat, then final softening with a mixture of brains and urine that serves as a tanning agent. Each of these techniques was developed over generations, refined by trial and error, and transmitted through observation and practice. No textbook, no manual, just hands teaching hands. This is civilization, not the word we usually attach to it. No marble columns, no written laws, no standing armies, but civilization in its truest sense. A community of people who have organized their knowledge, their labor, and their spiritual life into a coherent system that sustains them across generations. They are not waiting for civilization to arrive. They are living it. The ceremony ends, or the ritual, or the healing. Whatever it was, it is over. The group files out of the chamber, back up the passage, into the light. The woman with the ochre is the last to leave. She pauses at the entrance, looks back into the darkness, and places her palm flat against the wall. She holds it there for a long moment. Then she turns and climbs toward the sun. Years pass. Decades. Generations. The rain keeps falling. Season after season, the monsoons push north across Africa, and the Giza Plateau receives its share. The grass grows. The acacia trees thicken. The Nile floods and retreats, laying down rich black silt across the valley floor. The people of the plateau continue their lives, grinding grain, hunting, fishing, telling stories. descending into the chambers beneath the rock for their rituals and their dead. And then, so slowly that no single generation notices, the rain begins to change. It does not stop all at once. Climate shifts rarely do. What happens is subtler. One year, the monsoon arrives a week late. The grass on the plateau does not grow quite as tall. The pools in the natural depressions evaporate a little faster. The following year, the rains are shorter, still heavy, but compressed into fewer weeks. The year after that, a dry spell stretches through what should have been the wettest month. The acacia trees begin to lose their lowest branches. The animals that depend on the standing water, hippos, crocodiles, the vast flocks of water birds, begin to drift southward, following the retreating moisture. The smell of the air changes, drier, dustier. The mineral tang of wet limestone gives way to something sharper, the scent of hot rock and dry sand. It is a smell you know. If you could watch it in time lapse, 10,000 years compressed into 10 minutes, you would see the green drain out of the landscape like water from a bathtub. From the north and from the center simultaneously, the brown expanding, the rivers thinning to threads, the lakes shrinking to puddles ringed with white salt. The trees would fall in slow motion. The animal herds would stream southward like dark rivers themselves, following the retreating green. And the people would gather along the Nile, pressing closer together year by year, their camps merging, their customs blending, their memories of the wider world becoming stories, then legends, then myths. Between roughly 5,500 and 3,500 BCE, the African monsoon belt retreated southward. The reasons are complex. Orbital changes in the Earth's axial tilt, shifts in sea surface temperatures, feedback loops between vegetation loss and reduced rainfall. But the effect was simple. The rain stopped, and everything that depended on the rain began to die, or move, or transform. The process was not gentle. It was not a graceful decline. Paleoclimate data from sediment cores in the Gulf of Guinea and from speleothems in North African caves suggest that the transition included abrupt dry episodes. Decades-long droughts that would have been catastrophic for communities dependent on rainfall agriculture and seasonal grazing. Imagine a drought lasting 30 years. Then imagine another one, 50 years later, then another. Each recovery a little less complete than the one before. Each generation inheriting a drier world than the one that came before it. The lakes dried up. Lake Chad, which had been the size of an inland sea, shrank to a fraction of its former extent. Rivers that had flowed across the central Sahara disappeared. The grasslands turned to scrub. The scrub turned to sand. Within 2,000 years, a geological eye blink. One of the most fertile regions on Earth became one of the most barren. The wind carries sand now where it once carried the smell of rain. On the Giza Plateau, the effects were visible within a few generations. The grass thinned. The pools stopped refilling. The game animals vanished. The people who had lived on the plateau for millennia were forced to make a choice that has been repeated in every drought, in every famine, in every climate crisis in human history. Stay and adapt, or move and survive. Most moved. They drifted toward the Nile, which continued to flow even as the surrounding land dried. The river became a lifeline, a narrow green corridor through an expanding desert. People who had once lived across a vast landscape compressed into the valley, bringing their knowledge, their traditions, their stories, and their memories of a wetter world. But they did not forget the plateau. Memory in oral cultures is not fragile. It is not the hazy, unreliable thing that modern people, dependent on written records and search engines, assume it to be. Oral memory is structured, disciplined, and tenacious. Stories are repeated in specific forms. Genealogies are recited in exact sequences. The locations of important places, water sources, sacred sites, burial grounds, are encoded in songs and narratives that are taught to children before they can walk. These memories persist for hundreds of generations. Aboriginal Australians carry accurate geographical knowledge of coastlines that were submerged by rising seas over 10,000 years ago. It is entirely possible, even likely, that the people who moved from the Giza Plateau to the Nile Valley carried with them precise memories of the chambers beneath the rock. They remember the passages, the niches, the flat stone, the sound of the chamber when a voice hummed at just the right pitch. They remembered the shape of the outcrop that looked like a resting animal. And they told their children, and their children told their children. And somewhere down that chain of whispered knowledge, someone decided to go back. The chambers beneath the rock were still there, drier now. The water that had seeped through the limestone had slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The passages were dusty. The air inside was still and warm where it had once been cool and damp. But the niches were still carved. The figurines were still in their alcoves. The flat stone where the ochre had been ground still bore its red stain. And the outcrop at the eastern edge, the one that had been trimmed and shaped by the earliest inhabitants, still stood. Weathered now by centuries of drying wind, its surfaces roughened, its edges softened, but still recognizably shaped, still bearing the marks of human intention. It looked, if you squinted, if you let your imagination fill in the gaps that time had carved, like an animal. A large animal, lying on its belly, facing east toward the rising sun. A lion, perhaps, or something older than lions. Something that existed only in the stories told by people who remembered the rain. Your eyelids are heavy. That is fine. The weight of them is the weight of 10,000 years of human experience pressing gently down. Every ancestor who ever closed their eyes by firelight, every mother who blinked against sleep while holding a child, every old man who let his gaze soften and his vision blur as the stories washed over him. They are all in your eyelids right now. That heaviness is inherited. It is ancient. It is yours. Centuries passed. The Sahara hardened into its modern form. A vast ocean of sand and stone, hostile to all but the most specialized forms of life. The Nile Valley became the only habitable corridor, and the people who lived along it began to develop the technologies and social structures that would eventually become dynastic Egypt. Agriculture intensified. Settlements grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. Hierarchies formed. Writing emerged. First as accounting marks on clay, then as the complex symbolic system we call hieroglyphs. And at some point, someone in this emerging civilization looked up at the limestone plateau to the west and saw the shape, the weathered outcrop, the suggestion of a body, the hint of a face. Perhaps they already knew what it was. Perhaps the stories had been specific enough. Turn left at the lion-shaped rock. Descend where the cool air rises. Follow the passage until the ceiling opens. Perhaps the knowledge of the chambers had survived intact, passed from keeper to keeper across 3,000 years of oral tradition, waiting for a generation wealthy and organized enough to act on it, to clear the sand, to widen the passages, to carve the rough suggestion of an animal into the unmistakable form of a guardian. Or perhaps they discovered it fresh. Perhaps a shepherd chasing a goat across the plateau stumbled into the fissure. Perhaps a quarry worker, cutting blocks for an early mastaba tomb, broke through a wall and felt the cool dead air of an underground space rush past him like the exhale of a sleeping god. Perhaps the discovery was an accident. But what came next, the carving, the shaping, the deliberate placement of a monumental figure over an underground network, that was not accidental. That was a decision, a choice to mark the entrance, to guard it, to declare in stone that something lay beneath that was worth protecting. Whether they carved the Sphinx from scratch, or whether they recarved a shape that was already there, trimming the head, refining the features, adding the headdress, is the question that divides researchers to this day. Schock believes the body is ancient, the head recarved. Leaner believes the entire monument was created in the 4th dynasty. Reader places the initial quarrying somewhere in between. What none of them dispute is that the Sphinx faces east. It faces the rising sun, and beneath it, sealed in stone, are spaces that have not been opened. The morning comes whether you are awake for it or not. The sun rises over the Nile. The Sphinx watches. It has always watched. And the chambers below, carved by water, shaped by hands, sealed by time, hold whatever they hold in a darkness so complete that the word darkness does not quite capture it. It is not the absence of light. It is the presence of stone. Every direction, every surface, stone and silence, and the faint mineral memory of water that fell when the world was young. Rest here for a moment. There is no rush. The stone has waited 10,000 years. It can wait a little longer. And you, lying wherever you are lying, breathing whatever air surrounds you, carrying the same calcium in your bones that lines the walls of those buried chambers. You can wait too. The next part of the story will come. It always does. Stories are patient things. They outlast the people who tell them. They outlast the stones that inspire them. They outlast the rain. There is a building in Cairo, about 11 kilometers from the Sphinx, that most tourists never visit. It is not beautiful. It is not ancient. It is a concrete structure on the campus of the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics. And inside it, on a desk cluttered with seismographic printouts and geological survey maps, sits a folder of data that has been waiting for someone to act on it for over 30 years. The data is from the 1991 Debicki survey, ground-penetrating radar scans of the bedrock beneath the Sphinx, the rectangular anomaly beneath the left paw, the void, the chamber that might not be a chamber, the question that has never been answered because the next step, the careful, controlled, non-destructive investigation that modern technology makes entirely possible, has never been permitted. 30 years. In those same 30 years, we have landed rovers on Mars, sequenced the human genome, mapped the ocean floor with sonar, and used satellite imagery to discover lost cities beneath the Amazon rainforest. We have peered into black holes at the center of distant galaxies. We have read the DNA of Neanderthals who died 40,000 years ago, but we have not looked beneath the Sphinx. The hum of fluorescent lights, the click of a keyboard. The modern world moves forward at tremendous speed, and the ancient world waits beneath it, patient and still. This is the echo, the pattern that repeats, the mirror between then and now. When the people of the Giza Plateau watched their climate change, watched the rain diminish, the grasslands brown, the rivers thin, they did not have the language of atmospheric science. They did not speak of monsoon belt migration or orbital forcing or albedo feedback loops. But they experienced the same thing that people in the Sahel, in Australia, in California, in the Mediterranean are experiencing right now. The slow drying of a landscape. The creeping awareness that the world you grew up in is not the world your children will inherit. The numbers are specific and worth stating plainly. Since 1970, the Sahel region of Africa, the southern edge of the Sahara, has experienced a 30% decline in average rainfall. Lake Chad, the same lake that was an inland sea during the Green Sahara period, has shrunk by 90% since 1963. In the American West, the Colorado River, which supplies water to 40 million people, has lost roughly 20% of its flow since 2000. The Aral Sea in Central Asia has effectively vanished. These are not ancient events. These are happening now, in your lifetime, while you sleep. A faucet drips somewhere in your home, or perhaps it does not. Perhaps the water is off, the pipes are silent, and the only sound is the low hum of electricity in the walls. Either way, water is near you. It always is in the modern world. You turn a handle and it appears. You press a button and ice drops into a glass. The miracle of effortless water, the thing that people on the Giza Plateau would have traded everything they own to possess, surrounds you so completely that it has become invisible. The people who descended into the chambers beneath the plateau understood water differently. They understood it as sacred because it was scarce. They understood it as powerful because they had watched it shape stone. We have lost that understanding, not through any failure of intelligence, but through the simple abundance that modern infrastructure provides. When water comes from a tap, you forget that it comes from rain. When rain falls on concrete, you forget that it once fell on limestone and carved chambers in the dark. The echo is not exact. It never is. But the shape of it is recognizable. A civilization that depends on a climate pattern that is shifting beneath its feet. A people who have built their entire way of life on assumptions about water that are no longer true. The details differ. We have satellites, and they had saddle querns, but the fundamental situation is the same. The rain is changing, and we are not ready. Dust settles on the survey maps in the Cairo office. No one has opened that folder in months. There is another echo worth noting. The reluctance to investigate the chambers beneath the Sphinx is not unique to Egyptian archaeology. It is a pattern that appears wherever new evidence threatens established understanding. When Alfred Wegener proposed continental drift in 1912, he was dismissed by the geological establishment for 50 years. When Barry Marshall proposed that stomach ulcers were caused by bacteria rather than stress, he had to infect himself to prove it. When evidence of pre-Clovis human settlement in the Americas began to accumulate in the 1970s, it took decades for the archaeological mainstream to accept that humans arrived in the New World earlier than the established timeline allowed. The resistance is never malicious. It is structural. Established paradigms are not just ideas. They are institutions. They are careers. They are departments and journals and funding streams and textbooks. Changing a paradigm does not just require new evidence. It requires restructuring the human systems that were built around the old evidence. And that is slow, painful, unglamorous work. The Sphinx sits at the intersection of two paradigms. The established view that dynastic Egypt began around 3100 BCE and that nothing of significance preceded it on the Giza Plateau is supported by an enormous body of archaeological evidence. The temples, the tombs, the pottery sequences, the inscriptions, all of it is consistent with a civilization that emerged, flowered, and declined within the last 5,000 years. Challenging this timeline is not a small thing. It is asking an entire discipline to reconsider its foundations. And yet the stone says what it says. The water erosion is there. The radar anomalies are there. The passages are there. The evidence does not shout. It whispers, but it does not go away. A cool breeze moves through an open window somewhere in the world. Perhaps yours. The pattern extends beyond climate and beyond institutional resistance. It extends into the very way we relate to the ground beneath our feet. Modern cities are built on surfaces. We pave them. We landscape them. We construct on top of them. But we rarely think about what is below. The average city dweller has no idea what lies beneath their street. The geology, the hydrology, the deep stratigraphy of natural and human-made layers that support everything above. We have become a surface civilization. We look up at screens, at buildings, at satellites. The ancient inhabitants of the Giza Plateau looked down. They understood that the world beneath the surface was as real and as important as the world above it. In Mexico City, the modern metropolis sinks by as much as 50 centimeters per year because the aquifers beneath it are being drained. The city was built on a lake bed, the ancient Lake Texcoco, and the clay and volcanic sediments that compose its foundation compress as water is extracted. Buildings tilt. Sewage lines crack. The cathedral in the Zocalo has subsided by over 12 meters since it was constructed in the 16th century. A city of 22 million people is slowly descending into the space where the water used to be. The Sphinx stares east with the patience of something that has watched this pattern before. There is a reason this story resonates so deeply with people who hear it. It is not just curiosity about hidden chambers or ancient mysteries. It is something more personal, more physical. It is the feeling that something about the world you live in does not quite fit. Your body was designed for a world that no longer exists. What cavities did it create? What passages did it hollow out beneath the surface? And did someone, at some point, find those natural cavities and use them? The silence beneath the stone is very old. Older than the pyramids. Older than the dynasties. Older, perhaps, than any name we know. In 1993, a team led by a seismologist named Thomas DeBecke conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys around the Sphinx. The technology works by sending electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measuring how they bounce back. Different materials, solid rock, sand, air, water, reflect the signal differently. It is the same principle as sonar. but through stone instead of water. Debicki's results showed something unexpected. Beneath the left paw of the Sphinx, the radar detected a large rectangular anomaly. A void, an empty space in the bedrock, roughly 9 meters by 12 meters, at a depth of about 5 meters. The shape was too regular to be natural. Natural cavities in limestone tend to be rounded, following the paths of water dissolution. This was angular, geometric. It had corners, a chamber. The Egyptian authorities did not grant permission to excavate. They have not granted permission since. The chamber, if it is a chamber, remains sealed, untouched, silent. Rain falls somewhere in the distance of your memory. The sound of it on warm stone. Debicki was not the first to detect anomalies beneath the Sphinx. In 1977, a team from Stanford Research Institute used resistivity measurements, passing electrical current through the ground and measuring how it flows, and found several cavities beneath and around the Sphinx. One appeared to be a tunnel running from the rear of the Sphinx toward the second pyramid of Khafre. Another seemed to be a vertical shaft descending from the rump of the Sphinx into bedrock. Earlier still, in 1978, the American Research Center in Egypt drilled several boreholes around the Sphinx. At least one borehole behind the Sphinx encountered a void. The drill dropped into empty space before hitting rock again. The logs from that drilling program have been partially published, partially lost, and partially disputed. What is not disputed is that the Sphinx sits on bedrock that is riddled with natural fissures, dissolved layers, and at least some anomalous voids that do not match the expected geology. Whether those voids are natural cavities enlarged by water, or whether there's something else entirely, remains an open question. Your breath moves slowly now, in and out, the same rhythm as the Nile rising and falling. The same rhythm as rain falling on limestone 10,000 years ago. There is one more detail worth mentioning before we go deeper. The Sphinx itself is not a single piece of stone. Its body was carved from the living bedrock of the plateau, quarried in place by removing the rock around it, leaving the lion shape standing. But its head is made from a harder layer of limestone than its body. The body is softer nummulitic limestone, more vulnerable to erosion. The head sits on a layer called member 3, denser, more resistant. This geological fact explains something that has puzzled observers for centuries. The head of the Sphinx is in much better condition than its body. If the entire monument were the same age and subjected to the same weathering, the head should be as eroded as the body, but is not. The head is relatively crisp. The body is deeply weathered. One explanation is geological. Harder stone weathers more slowly. That is true, but Schock and others have pointed out that the difference is too extreme for geology alone. The body shows thousands of years of water erosion. The head does not. One possibility, controversial, debated, but not dismissed, is that the head was recarved. That the original head was larger, more weathered, and was reshaped by a later dynasty into the pharaonic face we see today. If that is true, then the Sphinx's body is far older than its face. The lion has been lying on the plateau since a time before the Pharaohs, and whatever is beneath it has been waiting even longer. Consider, for a moment, what it means for a civilization to carve a monument and then vanish so completely that the next civilization assumes they built it themselves. The dynastic Egyptians, the ones we know, the ones with the hieroglyphs and the gold masks, attributed the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled around 2500 BC. His face, they said, his monument. But there are no inscriptions on the Sphinx itself that name Khafre. There is a stela, a stone tablet, placed between the paws by a later pharaoh, Thutmose IV, around 1400 BC. It tells a story about the Sphinx being buried in sand up to its shoulders, and Thutmose being promised the throne if he cleared it. Think about that. By 1400 BCE, the Sphinx was already ancient enough to be buried, already mysterious enough that a pharaoh felt he needed to bargain with it, already old enough that its origins were legend, not history. The sand settles. The wind carries the smell of warm stone and something older, the mineral tang of deep limestone, the scent of geological time. There is a passage at the rear of the Sphinx. It is small, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. It descends at a steep angle into the bedrock and then stops, blocked. Whether it was intentionally sealed or collapsed naturally is unclear. Several researchers have entered the first few meters of this passage over the decades. They describe the air inside as still and cool, carrying a faint dampness that seems impossible in the desert. The walls are rough cut. Tool marks are visible, though their age is debated. This is not a metaphor. It is evolutionary biology, stated plainly. The human body, your body, the one listening to this right now, was shaped by natural selection over roughly 2 million years of living as a small group hunter-gatherer in the African landscape. Your stress response, your sleep cycles, your digestive system, your social instincts, your capacity for attention, your need for movement, your relationship to darkness and silence. All of these were calibrated for an environment of open savanna, seasonal rhythms, firelight, physical labor, and small communities of people you knew by name. That world is gone. It ended, in evolutionary terms, about 5 minutes ago. Agriculture is 10,000 years old. Cities are 6,000 years old. Industrial civilization is 300 years old. The smartphone in your pocket is about 15 years old. Your genes have not had time to adjust. They are still running software designed for the Giza Plateau in 800 BC. This is called evolutionary mismatch, and it explains more about your daily experience than almost any other single concept. Consider sleep. You are lying in a dark room right now, or trying to, but the darkness is not real darkness. True darkness, the darkness that your ancestors slept in, the darkness inside the chambers beneath the Sphinx, is absolute. No LED indicator on a charging device. No streetlight filtering through curtains. No notification glow from a phone screen. Your pineal gland, the small endocrine organ deep in your brain that produces melatonin, was designed to respond to the complete absence of light. In true darkness, melatonin production increases sharply, and sleep comes quickly and deeply. In the ambient light pollution of the modern world, melatonin production is suppressed, and sleep becomes the elusive, fragile thing that most of us experience. You are not bad at sleeping. You are sleeping in the wrong century. Consider food. The woman on the Giza Plateau who ground grain each morning consumed roughly 2,000 calories a day, drawn from a diverse diet of wild grains, legumes, fish, game, tubers, fruits, and insects. Every calorie required physical effort to obtain: walking, grinding, digging, carrying. The food was unprocessed, high in fiber, rich in micronutrients, and consumed in patterns dictated by seasonal availability. Your digestive system was built for this diet. The acids in your stomach, the enzymes in your saliva, the length of your intestines, the sensitivity of your insulin response, all of it was optimized for a food environment that bore no resemblance to a modern grocery store. The processed foods that line those shelves, the refined sugars, the seed oils, the ultra-processed combinations of salt and fat and flavor chemicals, are not food in the sense that your body understands the word. They are simulacra. They trigger the same reward pathways that evolved to motivate your ancestors to seek out rare calorie-dense foods like honey and ripe fruit. But they deliver those triggers without the nutritional context your body expects. The result is a metabolic confusion that manifests as obesity, diabetes, inflammation, and a dozen other conditions that barely existed 10,000 years ago. You are not weak. You are a perfectly calibrated organism encountering substances it was never designed to process. The taste of honey on the tongue. Real honey, dark, thick, faintly smoky from a wild hive raided at dawn. Your ancestors would have walked miles for that taste. You can order it delivered to your door. Consider sound. The acoustic environment of the Giza Plateau in 800 BCE was dominated by natural sounds: wind, water, bird song, animal calls, the crackle of fire, the rhythms of human speech and song. These sounds are processed by the auditory cortex in a way that promotes calm and attentiveness. The human ear evolved to extract meaning from these sounds: the direction of a predator, the location of water, the emotional state of a nearby person. Natural soundscapes are neurologically restorative. Studies using fMRI imaging have shown that exposure to natural sounds activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state, while reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. The modern soundscape does the opposite. Traffic noise, mechanical hums, electronic alerts, the constant low-frequency drone of HVAC systems. These sounds activate the sympathetic nervous system. They keep the body in a low-grade state of alert. Not enough to trigger conscious anxiety, but enough to prevent the deep physiological relaxation that your body needs to repair itself. Chronic noise exposure has been linked to cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairment, and disrupted sleep architecture. The World Health Organization has identified environmental noise as the second largest environmental health risk in Europe, after air pollution. The silence inside the chambers beneath the Sphinx would have been medicinal. The absence of all surface sound, no wind, no birds, no human activity, would have created an acoustic environment that the human nervous system interprets as profound safety. You can go deeper into silence than you think. Your ears will adjust. Your heart will slow. The chatter in your mind, which is partly a response to external stimulation, will begin to quiet. Listen, right now, to whatever silence exists between the words. It is there. It has always been there. Consider social life. The community on the Giza Plateau number perhaps 30 to 50 people. You knew every face. You knew every voice. You knew who was reliable and who was not, who was generous and who hoarded, who told the truth and who embellished. Your social brain, the extraordinarily complex neural circuitry that allows you to track relationships, detect deception, manage alliances, and navigate hierarchy, was designed for this scale. Dunbar's number, the theoretical limit on the number of stable social relationships a human can maintain, is roughly 150. Your social media feed contains thousands. The result is a form of social overload that has no precedent in human evolution. Your brain attempts to track and respond to the emotional states, opinions, and behaviors of vastly more people than it was designed to handle. The cognitive load is enormous. The emotional exhaustion is real. The sense of disconnection that so many people report, the feeling of being surrounded by people but known by none, is not a personality flaw. It is a mismatch between the social environment you inherited and the social environment you inhabit. You are not lonely because something is wrong with you. You are lonely because your brain was built for a village and you live in a city of strangers. The fire has burned down the coals. The glow is low and warm. Someone is breathing nearby, slow, even already asleep. Consider movement. Your ancestors walked every day, miles, not for exercise. The concept would have baffled them, but because walking was the only way to get anywhere. To the water source, to the grazing grounds, to the neighboring camp, to the outcrop where the good flint was found. The human skeleton is an engineering marvel optimized for bipedal endurance locomotion. Your Achilles tendon stores and releases elastic energy with each stride. Your gluteal muscles, the largest muscles in your body, exist primarily to stabilize you during walking and running. Your vestibular system, deep in your inner ear, maintains your balance with a precision that no manufactured gyroscope can match. You are built to move, and you are most likely lying still. That is fine. Tonight, stillness is what you need. But the ache in your lower back, the stiffness in your hips, the tension in your shoulders, these are not signs of aging or weakness. They are signs of a body designed for motion, held in a posture it was never meant to sustain for hours at a time. The chair is an invention roughly 5,000 years old. Your spine is 400 million years old. The mismatch is not subtle. But even this, even the mismatch, even the ache, contains a kind of comfort, because it means your body is still calibrated for the old world. The ancient settings have not been erased. They are running beneath the surface of your modern life like water running beneath the surface of the Giza Plateau. Present, patient, ready to be accessed if you know where to look. But here is the part of the story that matters most, and it is the part that is most easily forgotten. You survived. Not you personally, though you have survived more than you give yourself credit for. Your lineage, your line, the unbroken chain of ancestors that connects you to the woman grinding grain on the Giza Plateau 10,000 years ago. She survived the desiccation of the Sahara. Her grandchildren survived the transition from nomadic life to settled agriculture. Their descendants survived the consolidation of power under the first pharaohs, a process that was almost certainly violent, coercive, and traumatic for the communities absorbed into the new state. Later generations survived conquest by Assyrians, by Persians, by Greeks, by Romans. Plague, famine, flood, war. Every single one of your direct ancestors, going back to the first single-celled organisms that appeared in the oceans 3.5 billion years ago, survived long enough to reproduce. Not one of them failed. Not one. The odds against this are so enormous that they cease to be meaningful as numbers. They become, instead, a kind of proof, not of any divine plan or cosmic purpose, but of something more modest and more powerful. Resilience. The human organism is built to endure. Your immune system is a masterpiece of adaptive engineering, capable of recognizing and responding to pathogens it has never encountered before. Your bones remodel themselves in response to the stresses placed on them. They grow denser where you need strength, more flexible where you need mobility. Your brain rewires itself every day, pruning and used connections and strengthening the ones you rely on. Your cardiovascular system adjusts to altitude, to temperature, to exertion, to rest. You're not a fixed machine. You're a process, a constantly adapting, self-repairing, self-optimizing process that has been refined by 4 billion years of natural selection. The people who lived through the desiccation of the Sahara did not have technology to save them. They did not have irrigation systems, water purification plants, desalination facilities, or global supply chains. They had each other. They had accumulated knowledge passed down through oral tradition. They had the ability to read a landscape, to notice when the grass was thinning, when the game trails were shifting, when the water sources were unreliable. And they had the willingness to move, to leave what was familiar and walk toward what was uncertain, trusting that their skills and their people would be enough. That willingness, that courage dressed in the plain clothes of practicality, is still in you. It is in the part of your brain that makes decisions under uncertainty. It is in the part of your nervous system that remains calm during crisis, while flooding with adrenaline only when action is needed. It is in the social instinct that makes you reach for another person when the ground shakes or the lights go out. You are descended from the ones who kept walking. The quitters have no descendants. And it was not strength that carried them through. This is important. Every extinction event in the fossil record, every climate catastrophe, every ecological collapse, the survivors were never the biggest, never the fastest, never the most aggressive. They were the most cooperative, the most flexible, the most willing to share information, to pool resources, to subordinate individual advantage to collective survival. Humans are not apex predators because of our teeth or our claws. We have neither. We are apex cooperators. We survive because we figured out how to carry knowledge between generations, how to coordinate action across groups, and how to care for the sick, the old, and the young even when resources were scarce. The chamber beneath the Sphinx, if it was used for ceremony, for ritual, for communal gathering, was a technology of cooperation, a place where the group came together, where shared identity was reinforced, where the stories that held the community together were told and retold in the resonant dark. We still build these spaces. Concert halls, theaters, churches, lecture rooms, any enclosed space where humans gather to share a collective experience in the dark. The architecture has changed. The impulse has not. A heartbeat. Steady. Yours. There's a specific form of resilience that is worth highlighting tonight because it connects directly to the Sphinx and to the chambers beneath it. It is the resilience of memory. The Aboriginal Australians have oral traditions that accurately describe geographical features, coastlines, islands, rivers that have been submerged since the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago. These are not vague myths. They are precise descriptions that match the bathymetric data from modern seafloor surveys. A people transmitted accurate geographical knowledge across 400 generations without writing it down. They did it through song, through ceremony, through the disciplined repetition of stories that were too important to forget. If that kind of memory is possible, and it demonstrably is, then the idea that knowledge of the chambers beneath the Giza Plateau could have survived across 3,000 or 4,000 years of oral tradition is not far-fetched. It is, in fact, almost conservative. The real question is not whether the memory survived, but what form it took. Did it become a specific set of instructions? Go here, dig here, enter here? Or did it become something more abstract? A reverence for the plateau, a tradition of sacred architecture, a cultural impulse to build monuments over underground spaces? The pyramids themselves stand on the same plateau. They are aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions. They incorporate chambers, passages, and shafts that penetrate deep into bedrock. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid sits at the heart of the structure, surrounded by millions of tons of stone, accessible only through narrow ascending passages. The queen's chamber sits below it, with two mysterious shafts that do not reach the exterior surface. The subterranean chamber lies even deeper, carved into the bedrock beneath the pyramid's base, connected to the surface by a descending passage over 100 meters long. The impulse to build sacred spaces underground, to access the bedrock, to descend into the stone, to create chambers in the dark, did not appear suddenly in the Fourth Dynasty. It has deep roots, roots that reach back, perhaps, to the natural cavities of the Giza Plateau, and to the people who first discovered them. The thread of human memory is thin, but it is very, very strong. It had to be, because for most of human history, memory was all there was. No libraries, no databases, no cloud storage, just neurons firing in patterns that were reinforced by repetition, by emotion, by the association of information with place, with music, with the smell of smoke and the feel of stone. The memory palace technique, used by ancient Greek orders to remember lengthy speeches, works by associating each piece of information with a specific location in an imagined building. You walk through the building in your mind, and at each doorway, each room, each window, the information is waiting for you. The chambers beneath the Sphinx may have been a literal memory palace, a place where information was stored, not in writing, not in objects, but in the act of being there. Each niche, each passage, each turn in the corridor associated with a specific piece of knowledge, a specific part of the story that held the community together. To enter the chamber was to remember. To descend was to access the archive. We have traded depth for breadth. We have access to more information than any civilization in history, but we store almost none of it in our bodies. We outsource memory to devices. The ancient practice of carrying knowledge in your own cells, in the neural pathways strengthened by repetition, in the muscle memory of ritual gestures, in the emotional associations built by communal experience in sacred spaces, is nearly extinct. Not gone, just dormant, waiting in the limestone of your brain for the water of attention to reach it again. Consider, tonight, what you carry. Not in your pockets or your hands, but in your cells. Your mitochondrial DNA was passed to you by your mother, who received it from her mother, who received it from hers. An unbroken maternal line reaching back beyond the Sphinx, beyond the Green Sahara, beyond the last ice age, beyond the emergence of Homo sapiens, all the way to a single woman who lived in East Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. Geneticists call her mitochondrial Eve. She was not the only woman alive at the time. She was simply the one whose maternal line never broke. You are her, in a very direct, very literal, biochemical sense. Part of her is in every cell of your body right now. The mitochondria in your muscle cells, in your brain cells, in the cells that line your lungs as they expand and contract with each breath. They carry her code, her instructions, her legacy. She survived, and here you are. The fire is embers now. The wind has stopped. The plateau is quiet in a way that only very old places can be quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of so much accumulated silence that it has weight. You can feel it pressing against your chest. Not heavy, warm, like a hand. Whatever lies beneath the Sphinx, whether it is empty chambers or carved corridors or sealed rooms containing objects we cannot yet imagine, it is part of the same story that lives in your bones. The story of a species that found shelter in stone, that descended into darkness and emerged changed, that carried the memory of sacred spaces across millennia and built monuments to mark them. You do not need to solve the mystery tonight. You only need to know that the mystery exists, that there are still doors in the world that have not been opened, that the earth holds secrets that are patient and undisturbed, that the rain fell and the water went somewhere and the stone remembers. Close your eyes now, if they're not already closed. Let the weight of the story settle around you like sediment settling to the floor of a warm sea. Layer by layer, grain by grain, the limestone of the Giza Plateau was built this way. Not all at once, but slowly, over millions of years, one tiny shell at a time. You're being built the same way. One day at a time, one breath at a time, one slow, patient, ancient heartbeat at a time. And beneath you, always, the stone waits, holding what it holds, keeping what it keeps. Pull back now, slowly, the way a bird rises from a field, not in a rush, but in a widening spiral, each circle broader than the last, the ground falling away beneath you until the details blur and the shapes simplify, and what was close becomes pattern. The Sphinx is below you, a pale shape on a pale plateau, its face turned east, its body stretched along the rock like something waiting to be called. Around it, the three pyramids stand in their ancient alignment, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, diminishing in size from north to south, their limestone casings long since stripped, their surfaces rough and stepped, their shadows sharp in the early light. The modern city of Cairo presses against the plateau from three sides, a sprawl of concrete and traffic, and 22 million lives stacked on top of each other in the Nile Valley. The contrast is absolute. Stone and silence on one side, noise and motion on the other. Pull back further. The Nile is a green thread stitched through brown cloth. It curves northward, splitting into the delta, fanning out into a dozen channels that reach the Mediterranean like fingers spread on a table. On either side of the valley, the desert begins. Not gradually, abruptly. The irrigated fields end and the sand starts, as if someone drew a line. From this height, you can see the edge of the Sahara. Not the whole of it, because the whole of it is larger than the continental United States, larger than China, larger than any desert that has ever existed on Earth. It stretches south and west to the Atlantic, east to the Red Sea, north to the Atlas Mountains. A void, an absence, a place where the rain stopped coming and everything that depended on the rain either adapted, moved, or died. You are very small against this landscape. That is not a diminishment. It is a release. Pull back further still. The earth curves. Africa is a shoulder blade. Massive, angular, tilted slightly east. The Mediterranean is a blue crease between Africa and Europe. The Arabian Peninsula juts eastward like a broken tooth. The Indian Ocean glitters. Cloud systems spiral across the southern hemisphere in enormous white whirls, each one carrying more water than all the rivers on the Giza Plateau ever held. From this distance, the Sphinx is invisible. The pyramids are invisible. Cairo is a faint brown smudge. Everything you've been thinking about tonight, the limestone, the erosion, the chambers, the woman with the ochre, the sound of grain being ground, all of it exists on a speck too small to see. And that is the point. Deep time does not care about your problems. This is not cruelty. It is liberation. The things that weigh on you, the deadlines, the debts, the arguments, the uncertainties, the low-grade anxiety that hums beneath your days like an appliance left running in an empty room. These things are real, and they matter, and you should attend to them. But they are also brief. Astonishingly, incomprehensibly brief. The Sphinx has been sitting on the Giza Plateau for somewhere between 4.5 and 10,000 years, depending on whose chronology you accept. In either case, your entire life occupies less than 1% of the Sphinx's existence. Your worst year occupies less than 1/100%. The stone does not know your name, and that is a kind of freedom. Consider the scale more carefully. The limestone of the Giza Plateau was formed during the Eocene epoch, roughly 50 million years ago. The fossils embedded in it, the nummulites, the foraminifera, lived in a shallow sea that covered what is now the Sahara when the global climate was so warm that there were palm trees in Antarctica. 50 million years. The human species, Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans with brains and bodies indistinguishable from yours, has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Compared to the age of the stone they carved, humans have been around for 0.06% of the rock's existence. You are carving your life into material that was here long before you and will be here long after. The marks you leave on the people you love, on the work you do, on the small corner of the world you inhabit, are real marks. They matter, but they do not need to be monumental to matter. The woman who ground grain on the plateau left no inscription, no monument, no written name. But her calcium is in the soil. Her DNA is in your cells. Her knowledge, how to read the weather, how to find water, how to keep a child alive through a dry season, was transmitted forward through a chain of bodies and voices until it became the foundation on which everything else was built. The wind moves across the plateau. It has been moving for a very long time. There is a concept in geology called uniformitarianism. It is the idea that the processes shaping the Earth today, erosion, sedimentation, tectonic movement, volcanic activity, are the same processes that shaped it in the past. The present is the key to the past. The rain that fell on the Giza Plateau 10,000 years ago obeyed the same physics as the rain that falls on your roof tonight. The water that dissolved limestone chambers beneath the Sphinx followed the same chemical reactions that dissolved the calcium deposits in your kettle. The forces are identical, only the timescale changes. And if the present is the key to the past, then the past is also a key to the present. The patterns repeat. Civilizations rise in fertile periods and struggle in dry ones. Populations concentrate along water sources when the surrounding land becomes hostile. Institutions resist new information that threatens their authority. Sacred spaces are built underground, in the dark, in the silence, because that is where the human nervous system goes to reset itself. These are not coincidences. They are tendencies, deep structural patterns in the way humans interact with their environment and with each other. They repeat because the hardware has not changed. Your brain is the same brain that looked at a natural rock formation and saw a lion. Your body is the same body that descended into a cool chamber and felt the world go quiet. You are the past, walking around in modern clothes, checking a phone with hands that evolved to grip tree branches. The Giza Plateau has been a significant place for longer than we have words to describe. Before the Sphinx, before any human modification at all, the plateau was a landmark, a high point visible from the Nile Valley for miles in every direction. Animals used it as a reference point during migration. Birds circled its thermals. Predators watched from its edges as prey moved along the river below. The plateau was a place before it was a monument, and the forces that shaped it, tectonic uplift pushing ancient seabed above the surrounding terrain, erosion carving its contours, water dissolving its interior, were operating for tens of millions of years before any creature with eyes existed to see it. The stone does not need to be seen to exist. This is an obvious statement, but sit with it for a moment. The chambers beneath the Sphinx, if they exist, have been in darkness for millennia. No photon of light has touched their walls since they were sealed. And yet the walls are there. The air inside them is there. The silence is there. Existence does not require observation. The universe was here for 13 billion years before anything evolved the ability to look at it. Rocks formed, stars burned, galaxies spiraled. None of it was witnessed. All of it was real. Your sleep tonight will be like that. Real but unwitnessed. You will descend into a darkness of your own. The deep, dreamless stage of slow-wave sleep where consciousness retreats and the body repairs itself. Your hippocampus will consolidate the day's memories, filing them into long-term storage. Your glymphatic system will flush metabolic waste from your brain. Your growth hormone will pulse, repairing muscle tissue and strengthening bone. All of this will happen without your awareness. You will be a sealed chamber, doing important work in the dark. Let the scale settle over you like a blanket, not crushing, covering. The way snow covers a field, softening the edges, muffling the sounds, turning everything the same gentle white. Your life is brief and the universe is old and both of these things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels out the other. Now, here, in this moment, consider the sheer improbability of your existence. Not as a motivational slogan, not as a greeting card sentiment, as a mathematical fact. Start with the Earth itself. The planet formed roughly 4.5 billion years ago from a cloud of gas and dust orbiting a young star. The conditions for life, liquid water, a stable orbit, a magnetic field to deflect solar radiation, a moon large enough to stabilize axial tilt, are so specific that we have not yet confirmed them on any other world. Earth may not be unique, but it is rare, staggeringly rare. The particular combination of mass, distance, chemistry, and gravitational accident that produced this planet is not something that happens often in the observable universe. On this rare planet, in a warm, shallow sea, roughly 3.5 billion years ago, chemistry became biology. The exact mechanism is still debated, but the result is not. Simple self-replicating molecules appeared, were enclosed in lipid membranes, began to metabolize energy from their environment, and started the process that would eventually produce every living thing that has ever existed on Earth. Every bacterium, every fungus, every plant, every animal, every human, all descended from that first flicker of organized chemistry in a warm pool or a deep-sea vent or a tidal flat we will never find. The odds of that first step are unknown. We have a sample size of 1, but the fact that it happened here, on this rock, in this solar system, in this arm of this galaxy, that is not nothing. That is everything. A single cell divided, and then divided again, and kept dividing for 3.5 billion years until it became you. The journey from that first cell to this moment involved every extinction event, every ice age, every asteroid impact, every volcanic winter, every pandemic, every drought, every flood, every predator, every parasite, every famine, and every war that has ever occurred on this planet. At any point, at any single point in that 3.5 billion year chain, if one ancestor had died before reproducing, the chain would have broken. You would not be here. The specific arrangement of atoms and molecules that constitutes your consciousness would never have assembled. The universe would have continued without you, and no one would have noticed, because there would have been no you to notice. But the chain did not break. Think about the specific improbabilities in the recent part of the chain. Your parents met. Out of all the billions of people on the planet, those 2 specific people found each other. And of the hundreds of millions of possible genetic combinations that their DNA could have produced, you were the one that happened. The specific egg, the specific sperm, the specific moment. If the timing had been off by a single day, a single hour, a different person would have been born. They might have looked similar. They might have been wonderful, but they would not have been you. The same is true for your parents, and their parents, and theirs. Each generation is a bottleneck of improbability through which your existence was squeezed. Go back 30 generations, roughly 1,000 years, and you have over 1 billion theoretical ancestors. Many of those lines converge, of course. The same individuals appear multiple times in your family tree. But the number of specific events that had to occur in the correct sequence for you to exist is so large that it defies calculation. You are not just unlikely, you are statistically impossible. And yet here you are, breathing, listening, existing with the quiet persistence of something that has no intention of stopping. A breath in, a breath out, the rhythm of it older than language. The woman on the Giza Plateau did not know you would exist. She could not have imagined you. Your world, your technology, your concerns, your particular arrangement of features and memories and preferences. But she carried you, in her cells, in the decisions she made, to eat this root rather than that one, to shelter here rather than there, to pair with this person rather than that one. Every choice she made constrained the future in ways she could not see, narrowing the possibilities until 10,000 years later, one specific possibility crystallized into the person lying here tonight, listening to a story about stone and water and time. You owe her nothing. She did not live for you. She lived for herself, for her community, for the immediate demands of survival and belonging and meaning that occupied every human life that has ever been lived. But the fact remains that without her specific existence, her specific survival, her specific choices, you would not be here. Your gratitude, if you feel any, is not owed to her. It is owed to the chain itself, to the unbroken sequence of lives that stretches back through every extinction, every catastrophe, every quiet Tuesday afternoon when nothing happened and an ancestor simply continued to exist. That continuity is the most extraordinary thing about you. Not your intelligence, not your creativity, not your accomplishments, your continuity. The fact that you are the leading edge of an unbroken wave of life that has been rolling across this planet for 3.5 billion years. You are the foam on the crest, temporary, fragile, catching the light. But beneath you is the full weight of the ocean. The stars are out. You cannot see them. Perhaps you're indoors. Perhaps the city lights are too bright. But they are there. The same stars that the woman on the plateau saw when she climbed out of the chamber and looked up. The constellations have shifted slightly. Precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis. But the stars themselves are the same. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, has been burning for roughly 200 million years. It was burning when the limestone of the Giza Plateau was forming at the bottom of the Eocene Sea. It will be burning long after the Sphinx has eroded to a nub of stone and the pyramids have been reclaimed by the desert. You are here for such a short time, and the fact that you are here at all is the most improbable, most extraordinary, most quietly miraculous thing that has ever happened in your particular corner of the universe. Let that settle, not as pressure, not as obligation, as warmth. There is a particular kind of gratitude that does not require a recipient. It is not directed at anyone. It is not transactional. It is simply the recognition that something extraordinary has happened and that you are standing inside it. The way you might feel standing in a cathedral, or at the edge of the ocean, or in a field at night with the Milky Way overhead. Not grateful to someone, but grateful that this exists, that any of this exists. That matter arranged itself into atoms, and atoms into molecules, and molecules into cells, and cells into organisms, and organisms into a creature that can lie in the dark and feel wonder. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. The story is nearly finished now. Not the larger story, that one has no ending, or at least no ending we can see from here. But this story, The one about the Sphinx and the water and the chambers and the long, patient, unbroken chain of lives that connects you to the people who first descended into the dark beneath the plateau. What lies beneath the Sphinx may be empty chambers, natural karst voids shaped by water, occupied by nothing but still air and mineral dust. That would be a perfectly acceptable answer. The earth is full of empty rooms. Or maybe something else. Modified chambers, carved walls, artifacts, evidence of a culture that existed before the Pharaohs, before hieroglyphs, before the conventional timeline of civilization begins. That too would be an acceptable answer. The earth is full of surprises. Either way, the question is worth asking. And the fact that it has not been fully answered, that the investigations that could resolve it have been delayed, deferred, and denied, does not diminish the question. It enlarges it. A question that persists for decades without resolution becomes more than a question. It becomes a testament to the limits of institutional courage and the patience of stone. The Sphinx will wait. It has been waiting for millennia. It will wait for the technology, the permits, the political will, and the intellectual honesty required to look beneath it and accept whatever is found. It does not care whether the answer confirms the established timeline or overturns it. It does not care whether Egyptologists or geologists or independent researchers are proven right. It is stone. It has no stake in the outcome. Only we do. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of this story. Not the mystery of the chambers, not the debate about water erosion, not the evolutionary mismatch or the resilience of human memory. The deepest lesson is simpler and older than any of these things. Some questions are worth sitting with. Not every mystery needs to be solved tonight. Not every uncertainty needs to be resolved before you can rest. The human mind craves closure. It is wired for it, optimized for it, uncomfortable without it. But the world does not operate on closure. The world operates on process, on gradual unfolding, on layers of sediment accumulating one grain at a time over millions of years until they become stone. The answer to what lies beneath the Sphinx will come. It will come when the conditions are right. And in the meantime, the question itself is a gift. It is a reminder that the world is larger than our current understanding of it, that there are still doors we have not opened, that the earth holds secrets and is under no obligation to reveal them on our schedule. You do not need to solve anything tonight. The questions will keep. They have kept for 10,000 years already. They will survive another night. And there is something beautiful about an unanswered question, something alive about it that a settled answer does not possess. An unanswered question is a door that is still open, a corridor that has not been fully walked, a chamber that still holds its breath in the dark, waiting for the sound of footsteps that may come tomorrow, or may come in 100 years, or may never come at all. The world is full of sealed rooms. Most of them will never be opened, and that is not a tragedy. It is a promise. It means there is always more, always something beneath the surface that we have not yet reached, always a deeper layer, a softer stratum, a void in the stone where the water went and left its memory behind. The plateau is quiet. The city beyond hums, but the hum is distant now, receding like a tide pulling back from a shore. The Sphinx faces east. The first stars are appearing, faint, then brighter, then everywhere, filling the sky with a light that left its source years or centuries or millennia ago and is only now arriving, only now touching the worn stone face that has been watching the sunrise since before anyone alive can remember. Thank you for being here tonight, for giving your time and your attention to a story about stone and water and the people who lived before the desert came. You did not have to stay this long. You could have drifted off at any point. And if you did, that is perfectly fine. The story continued without you, the way the river continues whether anyone watches it or not. But if you're still here, still listening, still breathing in the dark with your eyes closed and your body heavy and your mind softening at the edges like wet clay, then thank you. It matters. You matter, not because of what you do or what you have or what you know, but because you're the latest point on a line that has never been broken. You are the newest grain of sediment on a shore that has been building for billions of years. If this story helped you rest, then it did what it was meant to do. If it made you curious, that is even better. Curiosity is the oldest human technology, older than fire, older than language, older than the stone tools scattered across the Giza Plateau. It is the impulse that sent the first person crawling into a dark fissure in the rock, not knowing what they would find, only knowing that the cool air rising from below meant there was something down there worth discovering. That impulse is in you right now. It does not need to be acted on tonight. It just needs to be felt. A warmth in the chest, a softening of the brow, the faintest tug of wonder, like a thread connecting you to every person who has ever looked at the Sphinx and thought, what is beneath you? Somewhere tonight, a geologist is looking at a seismographic readout. Somewhere, a graduate student is writing a dissertation about karst hydrology in North Africa. Somewhere, an Egyptian bureaucrat is reading a permit application and weighing the risks of saying yes against the risks of saying no. The story moves forward even while you sleep. It moves forward because people keep asking, because the question will not go away, because the water erosion is still there on the walls of the enclosure, and the radar anomaly is still there in the data, and the passages are still there in the stone, waiting with a patience that makes human patience look like impatience. The answer is waiting, and so are you. Both of you are very good at it. Rest well. You are a descendant of survivors. The calcium in your bones is cousin of the calcium in the Sphinx. The water in your cells fell as rain on an ancient plateau. The stories in your memory are the latest links in a chain that stretches back 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 3.5 billion years to the first cell that divided in a warm sea and began, without knowing it, the long, improbable, magnificent process of becoming you. Tomorrow, the story continues. The Sphinx will be there. The chambers will be there. The questions will be there. And you will be there too, rested, breathing, alive, carrying the whole ancient weight of the world in your bones as lightly as a child carries a stone picked up from a beach and placed in a pocket without knowing why. Sleep now. The stone will keep watch. And the rain that fell 10,000 years ago is still down there, somewhere in the mineral memory of the rock. It remembers, even if we have forgotten, even if no one is listening. The water remembers the way to the dark places. It always has. It always will.